The field shook before it began. Drums thundered, steel clashed, and banners cut the air like blades of pride. Armies gathered, shoulder to shoulder, swelling like an ocean of noise. Their confidence screamed across the horizon. Every soldier shouted their own certainty. Every commander raised their voice to claim victory before the first strike. It was deafening, but above it all, something heavier hung, not a roar, not a cry, not a chant. Silence, your silence. It drifted across their noise like a storm cloud, invisible but undeniable. It didn't announce itself. It pressed against their lungs, against their chests, against the certainty they thought they carried. The louder they grew, the smaller it all felt. The more they raised their war cries, the more hollow they sounded, because silence stripped them. Silence echoed louder than their drums. It mocked every scream without moving a tongue. Their generals thought numbers were weight. Their kings thought noise was power. But even they began to sense it, that dreadful stillness watching them, that unbroken quiet cutting deeper than any blade. What kind of power speaks without a voice? What kind of presence doesn't need to shout, doesn't need to command, doesn't need to prove, because silence proves itself? Their blades trembled in hands still held high. Their banners wavered, not from wind but from unease. Some soldiers dared to look past the chaos, to the figure that didn't move, didn't chant, didn't even breathe loud enough to be heard. And in that quiet, every cheer lost meaning. What good is a scream when it dies against something that never needed to answer? What good is a war cry when silence is the law above it? The storm had gathered, but not theirs, not their roar, not their drums, yours. The storm that doesn't rage, doesn't howl, doesn't thunder, but suffocates, chokes, drowns them in the weight of nothing. They had gathered to fight a war, but instead they stood trembling beneath a silence that was already winning. The banners still flew, the steel still clashed, but the hearts holding them faltered. The noise of their army became the sound of denial, because the storm wasn't out there. It was inside them, planted by your silence, fed by their own fear, and the revelation seeped in, slow and merciless, that no matter how many voices they raised, how many drums they broke, how many swords they drew, they could not rise above it. The storm was already here, not wind, not fire, not blood, silence, your silence. And it was stronger than them all. The battlefield trembled before the first strike. Noise was their crown, their weapon, their ritual of control. They came draped in banners, painted in blood-red symbols, their chants swelling like tidal waves. Every general believed the echo of their drums could rattle bones, that the clamor of their voices could drown doubt. Noise became their shield. Noise became their illusion of strength. The ground shook under stomping boots. The skies cracked with metallic roars. Trumpets, horns, war cries, an orchestra of chaos designed to crush spirit before steel ever touched flesh. This was their faith. If they screamed loud enough, maybe they could bury your silence. But silence cannot be buried. Silence rises, silence lingers. And your silence was not weakness. It was weight. Each roar that split the air only deepened the contrast. Their thunder clashed against an unshakable void. Their screams crashed like waves. But you were the cliff, unmoved, immovable, eternal. They began to notice it. The louder they grew, the smaller they felt, because every chant of victory dissolved into the abyss of your quiet. Every beat of their war drum was swallowed whole, leaving only an aftertaste of futility. Noise is fragile. It depends on attention. It demands recognition. If no one flinches, If no one trembles, if no one bows, the noise shrivels into desperation. And that's what your silence did. It stripped their noise of meaning. It turned their roar into a cry for validation. The generals barked louder. The soldiers shouted harder. The drums pounded faster. But the more they performed, the more hollow it became. Every echo betrayed a crack in their certainty. Every scream betrayed a growing fear. Because silence was not absence, it was presence. A presence they could not command, could not crush, could not kill. You stood still, breathing, watching, wordless. And somehow in that restraint, you spoke more than 1,000 declarations. Your silence said, I don't need to answer you. I don't need to match your chaos. I don't need to waste my breath on the doomed. Their noise was fire, but yours was the void that smothered flame. Their noise was thunder, but yours was the sky that swallowed lightning. Their noise was fury, but yours was the calm that reminded them storms pass, but silence remains. And slowly they began to fear it. Because what man can fight, what he cannot hear? What soldier can strike what does not scream back? What king can command when his decrees vanish into nothing? They came to understand too late that noise cannot conquer silence. Noise burns out. Noise exhausts itself. Noise demands fuel. But silence, they thought it was nothing. They thought it was emptiness, just the absence of sound. But when it stretched across the battlefield, it did not feel empty. It felt alive. It pressed down on their lungs, crawled beneath their armor, and lodged itself inside their skulls. The louder they had been, the faster silence struck back. The clash of steel, the thunder of their drums, the shrieking chants of their warriors, it all fell flat the moment quiet wrapped around them, like a hand closing on their throats. At first they laughed. Silence is weakness. They mocked. A void, a pause, a nothing. But then, the nothing started whispering. Not with words, not with sound, but with weight. It pressed on them heavier than stone. The silence wrapped its cold fingers around their minds, and suddenly their bravado began to fracture. They started hearing things not spoken, things not real, things they never wanted to face. The silence became a mirror, and the reflection staring back was not strength. It was doubt, it was fear, it was the truth they'd been running from while hiding behind their noise. Every general in their ranks suddenly felt naked. Every soldier clutching a sword felt his hand trembling, because silence doesn't forgive, it doesn't flatter, it doesn't lie. Noise can disguise a coward. Noise can dress weakness in armor. Noise can drown out the whisper that says you're not ready for this war. But silence strips the disguise away. It pulls the coward into the light, and it forces every man to hear his own heartbeat, his own doubts, his own mortality echoing inside his skull. They came to fight you with numbers. They came with armies, banners, fire, thunder, and noise. But silence was your blade. Sharper than their steel, colder than their iron. They looked at you standing there unmoving, unflinching, unspeaking, and the silence grew heavier. It didn't just hang in the air, it pressed down like chains across their backs, like a guillotine waiting to fall. And suddenly the loudest roar couldn't hide the trembling in their bones. Suddenly the most powerful command cracked with hesitation. Suddenly the endless drums sounded like funeral marches, each beat reminding them their time was closing in. You didn't lift a hand, you didn't take a step, you didn't need to, because silence had already done the work. It had broken them before you even touched them. Every man in their army was now fighting a second war inside his own mind. One soldier felt his grip loosen on the spear. He swore he heard his dead brother whispering in the stillness. Another swore the silence was laughing at him, a soundless cackle clawing at his sanity. Another felt it pressing so heavy, He wished the battle would start just to end the torture of waiting. That is the true weight of silence. It isn't the absence of sound, it's the presence of truth. It makes liars crumble, it makes tyrants shiver, it makes armies question if their cause was ever real. And that's when they finally understood. The silence wasn't weakness, it wasn't a void, it was the sharpest weapon they had ever faced, and it was yours. An army doesn't shatter all at once. It begins in whispers, in small fractures no one notices at first. A glance exchanged between soldiers, a hesitation before obeying a command, the sound of a boot scuffing against stone, too cautious, too unsure. In the battlefield of silence, these cracks grow loud, because silence doesn't hide hesitation, it magnifies it. Every soldier hears the tremor in their comrade's breath. Every warrior feels the weight of stillness pressing against their chest. It is no longer the clash of swords that defines the field. It is the heartbeat, irregular and uneven, that gives them away. The generals scream louder, barking orders with desperate force, but their words echo into nothing. Commands, once sharp, dissolve into hesitation when silence swallows them whole. The soldiers obey slower, their movements clumsy, their faith shaken. They used to march like a single beast, a living wall of unity. Now each step feels heavier, disconnected, like a broken rhythm. One soldier lifts his weapon but lowers it just as quickly. Another glances over his shoulder, expecting an ambush in the dark. They start to imagine ghosts in the silence. They start to believe that the enemy is not out there. It's inside their own heads. Discipline cracks first. The neat lines break. The formations scatter. And once the chain is broken, loyalty is next. When silence wraps its cold fingers around them, every man fights for himself. Every soldier begins to wonder if the comrade beside him is truly an ally, or if he's already thinking of running. Noise was their strength. The war drums, the chants, the shouted promises of glory. They needed it to feel alive, to feel strong, to feel unbreakable. But in silence they are forced to face themselves. No drums, no chants, only the sound of their fear echoing back at them. And that is when unity collapses. One army turns against shadows, swinging at illusions, striking at enemies that are not there. The silence distorts their senses until they see threats in every shadow, danger in every stillness. The other army, the one bound by fear and fragile trust, turns inward. Suspicion grows like a poison. One soldier accuses another of cowardice. One blames another for hesitation. Voices rise, not in strength, but in desperation. They are no longer fighting you, they are fighting themselves. The battlefield becomes a mirror of ruin. On one side, an army swinging blindly into emptiness. On the other, an army tearing itself apart from within. And you stand in the silence, untouched. You don't lift a hand, you don't need to, because the silence has already done the work. The war that was meant to break you has instead broken them. Armies don't fall to the blade, they fall to the silence between strikes. And once the cracks begin, there is no stopping the collapse. Authority isn't lost in a scream, it isn't taken with a bullet. No authority dies in silence. The generals stand tall, their medals shining, their voices sharp, yet suddenly their words do not land. Orders echo, but no one listens. Commands fall like ashes. The silence swallows every syllable, grinding it down into dust. What is a general without an audience? What is a leader without fear to anchor him? Nothing but a man wearing a false crown. You see hierarchies of fragile things. They are made of sound. The shouted orders, the barked commands, the rattling chains of obedience. But when silence consumes the field, those chains snap. The generals wave their hands, they rage, they beg, but the silence does not return their authority, it erases it. The soldiers stare at their leaders with hollow eyes, no longer followers, only men trapped in a vacuum where no sound matters. Their discipline was a song, but the song has ended, and now all that's left is static. An army without leaders is not an army. It is a mob, and mobs do not march forward. They implode, so the battlefield twists into chaos. One soldier looks at another, uncertain, afraid. Suspicion slithers in. Whispers imagined or real tear loyalty apart. Blades point inward instead of outward. Brothers turn on brothers. Not because you fought them, but because silence fought for you. The generals scream louder now, desperate, but silence does not bend. Silence does not negotiate. It is merciless. Their authority dissolves before their own eyes, crumbling like paper set on fire. And then the collapse begins. Squads scatter, banners fall, no one salutes, no one obeys. The chain of command, broken, shattered, gone. Fire blooms across the battlefield, not from your hands, not from your weapon, but from theirs. They burn themselves, they destroy their own ranks, they tear down everything they built, all because silence cut the thread that held them together. That's the real trick, isn't it? To fight without fighting, to win without lifting a blade, to show them the emptiness of their crowns, the hollowness of their thrones. A general without control is just a man lost in the noise of his own insignificance. So you stay still, you say nothing, you do nothing, and in that nothing, the greatest destruction unfolds. The battlefield burns, not because you fought, but because you stayed silent. And silence in the end proved louder than any war cry. The nightmare doesn't end, it lingers, not loud, not chaotic, silent, invisible, but everywhere. They thought fear would fade once the fight was over, but fear doesn't need presence, it needs memory. And you became memory carved in bone. Every shadow they pass whispers your name. Every locked door reminds them of the night they couldn't cage you. Sleep slips away because dreams no longer belong to them. They belong to you. That's the haunting, not a ghost, not a demon, but the living echo of a mistake. Their mistake, because the real terror isn't that you struck once, it's that you could strike again, anytime, anywhere. The silence that follows your absence is louder than screams. Every corner feels rigged. Every plan feels fragile. Paranoia is no longer a weakness, it's survival. And here's the truth. They didn't just lose to you once. They'll keep losing, even in peace. Because peace doesn't exist anymore. Not for them. You turned their world into a prison without walls. No guards, no chains, just the weight of knowing they'll never outrun you. That's what they can't bury. Not your laughter, not your face, not your fire, but the echo of the mistake they made, and the nightmare it birthed. The battlefield is nothing now. No banners, no horns, no thunder of command, only the ashes of voices that once believed themselves eternal. They thought silence was weakness. They thought noise meant power. They mistook sound for strength, volume for victory. But when the silence came, it did not come as absence. It came as judgment. Look around. Their generals are gone. Their words burned to dust. Their soldiers stagger, not from your blade, but from the void pressing into their skulls. Every shout, every scream, every cry for leadership was devoured. And when nothing came back, they realized the war was already lost. Because silence is not the absence of war. It is the end of war. It is the crown of the victor. It is the suffocating truth that no weapon can strike against. They marched with their armies to destroy you. Steel on steel, voice on voice. Millions gathered under the illusion of unity. But what is an army when its roar falls silent? What is a king when the crowd refuses to cheer? What is a war when the enemy refuses to play? The revelation tears through them like fire through oil. Your silence was never weakness. It was the deadliest weapon they had no shield against. Because a sword cuts only once. A scream fades once it is shouted.
But silence lingers. It spreads, it multiplies, it crushes every chest, one heartbeat at a time, until even the strongest kneels, not from defeat, but from the unbearable weight of nothing. And so they collapse, not because you struck, not because you fought, but because they had nothing left to fight against. An enemy that does not answer is not an enemy, it is a mirror. And in that mirror they saw themselves unravel. The armies that screamed your name with hatred are the same armies now whispering it in fear. The silence stripped them bare, made them realize the truth they buried under orders, crowns and chains of command. They were never soldiers, they were just noise. Noise pretending to be purpose, noise pretending to be destiny. Now silence stands where you stand, not a throne, not a sword, not a banner, but only silence. And silence does not bend, silence does not bargain, silence does not bleed. This is the final revelation, not that you outlasted them, not that you destroyed them, but that they destroyed themselves the moment they mistook silence for surrender. Every empire believes its roar will echo forever. Every general believes their voice is immortal. But when the silence falls, their immortality dies. Their commands dissolve. Their armies fracture. Their crowns slip into dust. And what remains? Only the one who never needed to speak. Only the one whose silence became the empire itself. You lower your head, not in humility but in mockery. The battlefield listens, the dead listen, even the living, broken and trembling, lean forward, desperate for one final word, and you give it to them. Not a speech, not a sermon, not a roar, just a whisper, sharp enough to carve eternity into their bones. Your army screamed, but my silence carved the grave they now sleep in, and then nothing. No outro, no sound, only silence, haunting, eternal. The battlefield is nothing now. No banners, no horns, no thunder of command. Only the ashes of voices that once believed themselves eternal. They thought silence was weakness. They thought noise meant power. They mistook sound for strength, volume for victory. But when the silence came, it did not come as absence. It came as judgment. Look around, their generals are gone, their words burned to dust. Their soldiers stagger, not from your blade but from the void pressing into their skulls. Every shout, every scream, every cry for leadership was devoured. And when nothing came back, they realized the war was already lost. Because silence is not the absence of war, it is the end of war. It is the crown of the victor. It is the suffocating truth that no weapon can strike against. They marched with their armies to destroy you, steel on steel, voice on voice. Millions gathered under the illusion of unity. But what is an army when its roar falls silent? What is a king when the crowd refuses to cheer? What is a war when the enemy refuses to play? The revelation tears through them like fire through oil. Your silence was never weakness. It was the deadliest weapon they had no shield against. Because a sword cuts only once, a scream fades once it is shouted. But silence lingers. It spreads, it multiplies, it crushes every chest one heartbeat at a time until even the strongest kneels not from defeat, but from the unbearable weight of nothing. And so they collapse, not because you struck, not because they had nothing left to fight against. An enemy that does not answer is not an enemy. It is a mirror. It is a mirror. And in that mirror, they saw themselves unravel. The armies that screamed your name with hatred are the same armies now whispering it in fear. The silence stripped them bare, made them realize the truth they buried under orders, crowns and chains of command. They were never soldiers. They were just noise. Noise pretending to be purpose. Noise pretending to be destiny. Now silence stands where you stand. Not a throne, not a sword, not a banner. Only silence. And silence does not bend. Silence does not bargain. Silence does not bleed.
This is the final revelation. Not that you outlasted them. Not that you destroyed them. but that they destroyed themselves the moment they mistook silence for surrender. Every empire believes its roar will echo forever. Every general believes their voice is immortal, but when the silence falls, their immortality dies, their commands dissolve, their armies fracture, their crowns slip into dust, and what remains? Only the one who never needed to speak, only the one whose silence became the empire itself. You lower your head, not in humility, but in mockery. The battlefield listens, the dead listen, even the living, broken and trembling, lean forward, desperate for one final word, and you give it to them, not a speech, not a sermon, not a roar, just a whisper, sharp enough to carve eternity into their bones. Your armies screamed, but my silence carved the grave they now sleep in, and then, nothing, no outro, no sound, only silence haunting, eternal, heavier than any war drum.